The words fell like a gavel. Loud, deliberate, meant to be heard. The man behind the desk didn't whisper it. He didn't lean forward and murmur it with the decency of discretion. He said it the way people say things when they want a room to hear them, when they want witnesses, when they want the humiliation to have an audience. And it did. Every teller window in that branch of First Meridian Bank went quiet. The keyboard clicks stopped. The shuffle of papers stopped. Even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. The old man standing at the counter, dusty boots, a sun-faded jacket that had seen 20 harvests, a worn canvas hat folded in his hands, did not move. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He looked Marcus Hale dead in the eyes, and he said quietly, the way a man says something he has said many times before in many difficult rooms, "Sir, I'd just like to make a deposit." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And Marcus Hale had no idea who he was really talking to. In about 11 minutes his phone was going to ring, and the voice on the other end was going to know his name. Have you ever walked into a room and been made to feel like you didn't belong there? Like the very air was telling you to leave? If you have, stay with me. Because what happened next in that bank on a Tuesday morning in September is going to stay with you. Let me take you back, about 2 hours earlier. The county road that runs past the Gideon farm doesn't have a name on any map. Locals call it the Red Clay Road because in the summer when the drought cracks the ground open, the dust that kicks up behind your tires turns everything the color of old rust. It stretches 6 miles from the state highway to the gate of the farm, and if you drive it slow enough, just before the last curve, you can see the top of the silo above the tree line, white as a lighthouse against the Georgia sky. Solomon Gideon had driven that road every single morning of his adult life. He was up before 4. He was always up before 4. His wife Della used to say that Solomon didn't wake up, he just stopped sleeping. That there was a switch somewhere inside him, flipped by God before he was born, that never truly turned off. She would say it laughing from the kitchen, pressing his breakfast into a brown paper bag because he never had time to sit. 2 biscuits, a boiled egg, and whatever fruit was coming in off the trees. That was Solomon's breakfast for 41 years. Della had been gone for 3 years now. He still folded the bag the same way she did. 1 fold up from the bottom, 2 folds across the top. He didn't know why, he just did it. The farm was 340 acres, not the biggest operation in Macon County, but not small either. Solomon grew cotton on the west fields and soybeans on the east, rotated every 3 years the way his father taught him, the way his grandfather had figured out by watching the land and listening to it the way you listen to a person. The soil on that farm had fed 4 generations of Gideons, and Solomon intended to make it 5. His grandson Marcus, not the banker, his own grandson, little Marcus, 8 years old and already following him down the rows before school, had started asking questions about the combine last spring. Solomon had placed the boy's small hands on the steering wheel while the machine idled in the barn, just to let him feel it, the weight of it, the seriousness of it. He didn't say anything. He just let the boy hold it. That was how Solomon's own grandfather had taught him. The thing Solomon wore on his left wrist that morning, the thing he always wore on his left wrist, was a watch. Not an expensive watch, not by the standards of any watch store in any city. It was a Bulova, gold-cased, with a crack running through the crystal on the left side that had been there for 20 years and never seemed to bother the watch's keeping of time. On the back, engraved in letters so small you had to hold it close, were the words, "To E.G., that the land remembers. E.G. Elias Gideon, Solomon's grandfather. The man who had bought this farm in 1951 when almost nobody thought a black man could. The man who had stood at a different kind of counter, in a different kind of office, and refused to leave until he got what was right. Solomon fastened that watch every morning the way other men put on a cross. It was not decoration, it was instruction. He had a meeting that morning at First Meridian Bank in Caldwell, a deposit. $3 million, the result of a land use settlement that had taken 7 years to resolve, a dispute with an agricultural development consortium that had tried 3 separate times to acquire the eastern fields through what Solomon's attorney called strategic documentation pressure, and what Solomon himself called something less polite. They had failed all 3 times. The settlement had been reached 4 weeks ago. The certified check had arrived by courier on a Thursday. Solomon had held it for 4 days before deciding to deposit it. He wasn't sure why. He just wanted to hold it for a while. He thought Della would have wanted to hold it too. He dressed that morning in what he wore every morning, clean clothes, pressed by his own hand, the canvas jacket, the boots, the hat. He was not a man who owned a suit, and he did not feel the absence of one. He had somewhere to be and something to do, and that was enough. He arrived at First Meridian Bank at 9:47 in the morning. The branch manager's name was Marcus Hale, and he had held the position for 4 years, which was, in his own estimation, approximately 3 years and 11 months too long for a man of his capabilities. He had a master's degree from Emory. He had a wife whose family had money, old Georgia money, the kind that knew which fork to use and which charities to attach their names to. He drove a car that cost more than most of the annual incomes in Macon County, and he parked it in the space marked branch manager with a precision that suggested the parking space was the most important thing in the lot. He had grown up being told he was exceptional, and in a particular kind of way, in particular kinds of rooms, he was. He was sharp, he was polished. He was the kind of man who, when he walked into a room, expected the room to rearrange itself slightly to acknowledge him. He did not like surprises. He did not like being made to feel that he had misjudged something, and he did not like, in the privacy of his own judgment, the kinds of customers who walked into his branch looking the way Solomon Gideon looked that Tuesday morning. Hale had been standing near the front of the lobby reviewing a staffing report with his assistant manager when Solomon pushed through the glass doors. He saw the boots first, then the jacket, then the hat. He made a calculation. He made it in about 3 seconds, the way people make calculations they have been making their whole lives, the way the calculation becomes so automatic it no longer registers as a choice. He moved to intercept. "Can I help you find something?" he said. The "find something" was deliberate. It implied the man was lost. Solomon looked at him steadily. "I'd like to make a large deposit. I was told to come in person for something this size." Hale glanced at the envelope in Solomon's hand. "What kind of deposit?" "Certified check." "How much are we talking about?" Solomon told him. Hale almost laughed. He controlled it to a small, tight smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Sir, why don't you take a seat and one of our tellers will—" "I was told to speak with the branch manager." "I am the branch manager." "Then I'd like to speak with you, please." There was a pause. Hale looked at the man again. The dusty boots, the cracked crystal watch, the worn-down hat now folded between two large, work-calloused hands. He made his calculation again, the same one, and came to the same answer. He led Solomon to his office. He looked at the check for approximately 4 seconds before he said it. "Get that check out of my face." He said it with a small laugh. Not even a full laugh. A breath of a laugh, sharp through the nose, the way you laugh at something that doesn't quite deserve the full machinery of amusement. He pushed the check back across the desk with 2 fingers like it might be dirty. "I don't know where you got this or who printed it up for you, but this is not something we can process. This isn't how this works." Solomon didn't reach for the check. He left it where it was, in the center of the desk, between them, and he folded his hands in his lap. "It's a certified check," he said, "drawn on the First Meridian corporate account. I can give you the issuing attorney's contact information. I think there's been a misunderstanding." "I don't believe there has." "Sir," Hale leaned back in his chair. He used the word the way people use it when they don't mean it as a courtesy. "People like you don't typically walk in with this kind of figure. You understand that this triggers protocols, that we have to—" "People like me," Solomon said. Hale didn't flinch. He held eye contact. "People without a prior relationship with this institution. I'm just saying, my grandfather had an account at this bank in 1958. Solomon's voice was still calm, still even, still the voice of a man who knows that steadiness is its own form of power. "I've had an account here for 22 years. Hale pulled up the screen. He looked at it. He looked at the balance. He looked at Solomon again. Something moved across his face. Not regret, not quite, but something. He recalculated. He came to the same answer anyway. "I'm going to need to verify the source of these funds before we can—" "You have the check," Solomon said. "Call the issuing bank. I'll need time to—" "I have time." Solomon settled back in the chair. "I've been farming that land for 40 years. I've got time." But what Marcus Hale didn't know, what he could not have known because he hadn't done the thing that would have told him, was that 3 hours before Solomon Gideon walked through his front door, an email had been sent from the office of the chief executive of First Meridian Bancorp, headquartered in Atlanta, to the head of retail operations, flagging this deposit as a priority transaction. The settlement had been covered in the agricultural press. The Gideon case had been followed by people who watched land rights cases in the South the way other people watch elections, with that tight, bracing attention of people who know that what happens in courtrooms echoes in fields. One of the people who watched it was a man named James Calloway. James Calloway was the CEO of First Meridian Bancorp. He had grown up 40 miles from Macon County. He had worked at a bank branch as a teller at 19 years old. He knew what certified checks looked like. He knew what courage looked like when it walked through a door in dusty boots. He was already in the car. But that is getting ahead of things, because before any of that there was the matter of the watch. What happened next happened quickly, and the teller at window 3, a young woman named Priya Okonkwo, who had worked at the branch for 8 months and who would later describe what she saw with a precision that suggested she had been committing it to memory in real time, Priya saw all of it. Hale had stood up from his desk. He had come around the side of it, and there was something in his posture that had shifted, something that had moved from merely dismissive to performative. As if the audience in the lobby, which had been quietly watching through the glass office wall, had changed his calculation one more time, as if he needed the room to see him being in charge of something. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," he said. "Until we can verify—" "I'm not leaving," Solomon said simply. "Sir, my grandfather stood at a counter very much like this one, 63 years ago. He didn't leave then either." Hale reached across the desk and picked up the certified check. He looked at it one more time. And then, in front of Priya and every person in that lobby, he folded it. He folded it in half once, and then in half again, and he dropped it on the edge of the desk the way you drop a receipt you don't need. But that isn't what crossed the line. What crossed the line was the watch. Solomon had reached out his hand, palm up, and said, with the same quiet patience he had maintained for the last 14 minutes, "May I have my check back, please?" And Hale, moving to hand it over, looked down at the watch on Solomon's wrist. The Belova, the cracked crystal, the gold case worn thin on the edges from 40 years of fence posts and steering wheels and Georgia clay. "Nice watch," Hale said, and the way he said it was not a compliment. It was the opposite of a compliment. It was the word nice made into a weapon. "Where'd you get that? Pawn shop?" Priya would later say she heard someone at the teller windows draw a sharp breath. Solomon looked at his wrist. He looked at the watch his grandfather had worn on the day he signed the deed to 340 acres of Georgia land that no one thought he could own. He looked at the watch that had sat in his mother's jewelry box for 6 years after Elias Gideon died, waiting for Solomon to be old enough to wear it. He looked at the engraving on the back that he knew by heart, that the land remembers, and he closed his hand into a loose fist. "It was my grandfather's," he said. "Right," said Hale. He was still smiling that same tight smile when his desk phone rang. 3 things had happened in the 40 minutes before that phone call that Marcus Hale did not know about. The first was that James Calloway's car had exited the interstate at the Caldwell exit at 9:52 in the morning, 8 minutes after Solomon Gideon had walked through the front door. The second was that Priya Okonkwo, who kept her phone in her drawer during work hours in compliance with branch policy, had asked the assistant manager to cover her window for a moment, had gone to the restroom, and had sent a text message to her older brother, who worked for a legal firm in Atlanta that specialized in civil rights cases. That read, "You need to get someone over to First Meridian Caldwell right now. I'll explain later." The third was that a real estate attorney named Davis Whitfield, who had negotiated the land use settlement on Solomon's behalf and who had personally arranged this deposit with the corporate office, had called the First Meridian Bancorp General Counsel's office at 9:48, 1 minute after Solomon entered the building, to confirm the transaction was proceeding smoothly. It was not proceeding smoothly. The General Counsel's office had called the CEO's office. The CEO was already in the car. His name was James Calloway. He had been CEO of First Meridian Bancorp for 9 years. He had shepherded the bank through a merger, 2 recessions, and 1 federal audit. He was not a man who drove 40 miles personally to handle branch-level transactions, but he had followed the Gideon case. He had read about Elias Gideon in a long-form piece in an agricultural law review 3 years ago, an article about land rights and black farming families in the South and the systematic pressures that had stripped nearly 14 million acres from black landowners over the course of the 20th century. He had sat at his desk in Atlanta and read that article twice. He had thought about the branch he had worked at as a 19-year-old teller. He had thought about the things he had seen then, the calculations that got made in 3 seconds. The words, "people like you," said with polished smiles. He had thought about that for a long time. When the call came in about the Gideon deposit, he didn't call down to the branch. He got in the car. He walked through the doors of First Meridian Bank, Caldwell, at 10:31 in the morning, which was 6 minutes after Hale had dropped the folded check on the desk, and 3 minutes after the desk phone rang. Hale had answered the call with his normal manner, crisp, professional, the voice he used when the corporate line showed on the caller ID. He had said, "Marcus Hale, First Meridian Caldwell, how can I—" And the voice on the other end said, "Marcus, this is James Calloway." The lobby had 12 people in it at that moment, 3 of them had their phones out. One of them was Priya, back at her window, who would later say the color went out of Hale's face the way the sun goes behind a cloud, gradually, and then all at once. "Yes, sir. Good morning. I'm walking in your front door right now," Calloway said. "Don't hang up." The glass door opened. James Calloway was 61 years old, shorter than Hale had imagined him, wearing a dark suit and no tie. He walked through the lobby without looking left or right, holding the phone to his ear, his eyes fixed on the glass wall of the branch manager's office. He walked through the office door. He looked at Solomon Gideon first, and then he looked at Marcus Hale, and he said, into the phone and across the desk simultaneously, "You can hang up now." He reached out his hand to Solomon, not to Hale, to Solomon. "Mr. Gideon," he said, "I'm James Calloway. I'm the CEO of this bank. I want to apologize to you in person for what has happened here this morning, and I want to make sure that what should have taken 30 minutes gets done correctly and right now, with my full attention." He picked up the folded check from the edge of the desk. He unfolded it carefully. He looked at it with a kind of reverence, the way you look at something that has survived something it shouldn't have had to survive. He looked at Hale. "Step out, please," he said. Just that. 3 words. Hale stepped out. The lobby watched him go. The reckoning was not small. It never is when it comes. It comes with all the weight of all the years of the thing it is ending. Hale was placed on administrative suspension before noon. By 3 in the afternoon, the bank's corporate communications team had issued a statement acknowledging that a serious procedural and conduct failure had occurred at its Caldwell branch and that an immediate internal review was underway. The statement was short on specifics, which was itself a specific kind of answer. Davis Whitfield, Solomon's attorney, filed a formal complaint with the bank's regulatory oversight body the following morning. That complaint cited 14 minutes of documented conduct, including the verbal dismissal, the refusal to process a verified certified check, the desecration of the document itself, and the comment about the watch. Priya Okonkwo's account, precise, time-stamped in her memory, corroborated by 2 other witnesses, was a central pillar of that filing. 3 days later, a journalist from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution who covered agricultural and economic inequality in the rural South published a story. The story was careful, it was specific, it included the exact words, "people like you," and the watch. It included the name of Solomon's grandfather and the year he bought the land and what it had meant to own it. It included a photograph of Solomon that his grandson had taken on his phone that morning in the parking lot of the bank before Solomon went in, the way Solomon always paused to look at the watch before anything hard. The photograph was of Solomon's hand, close up, the Bulova on his wrist, the cracked crystal, the Georgia sky behind it. That photograph did what some photographs do, it went far. Within 72 hours, the story had been shared more than 400,000 times. The comments were the long kind, the kind where people tell their own stories. Where they say my grandfather, my father, my mother, me. Where they name the specific words that were said to them in specific rooms and describe the way they held themselves still on the outside while something broke or resolved on the inside. The comments were a record, hundreds of them, then thousands. The hashtag that formed organically without anyone planning it was simple. That the land remembers, the engraving, the 4 words from the back of the watch. They became a headline. By the end of the first week, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund had requested a meeting with Solomon's legal team. The Department of Agriculture's Office of Civil Rights had opened an inquiry, not just into the bank but into the broader pattern of obstruction in agricultural lending in rural Georgia counties. 3 other black farmers in the region, watching the story unfold, had come forward with accounts of their own encounters at financial institutions over the previous decade. First Meridian Bancorp, for its part, moved with the speed of an institution that understood what the alternative looked like. Hale was terminated, not suspended, terminated with a formal finding of conduct unbecoming. The bank's board of directors approved a 5-year initiative, formally named the First Meridian Agricultural Equity Program, providing expedited processing and dedicated relationship banking for small and mid-sized agricultural operations in underserved rural communities across 3 states. The initial funding commitment was $12 million. Not symbolic, real. James Calloway testified voluntarily before a state legislative subcommittee 6 weeks after that Tuesday morning. He sat at a table and he said the words out loud that needed to be said out loud, in a public room, on the record. He said that what happened in that branch that morning was not an isolated failure of one employee. He said it was evidence of a pattern that his institution and institutions like his had tolerated through inattention and comfortable assumption for too long. He said that the best he could do now was make sure it became the beginning of something different. He said that a man had walked into a branch carrying a check for $3 million and a watch his grandfather left him, and that both of those things should have been received with the same respect, and that one of them hadn't been, and that the one that hadn't been was the one that mattered more. The watch, he said, was not just a watch. 12 months later, on a Tuesday, the same day of the week, the same hour of the morning, Solomon Gideon drove the red clay road for the 42nd year in a row. He did not rush. He never rushed.